So we're going to be learning about Malachim today, angels. Since the Parsha begins with angels, so we're going to talk a little bit about them. Before we read the verses and talk about them, I'll just point out that we have many references to Malachim, to angels, throughout the Tanakh, both in the 5 books of Moshe, which we call the Torah, as well as the other books of the Tanakh, the Nevi'im and the Ksuvim, the prophets and the later writings. So we have, for example, in the Torah portion of Lech Lecha, Hagar converses with Malachim. In the Torah portion of Vayera, an angel tells Avraham not to slaughter his son. We have angels, of course, at the end in last week's Parsha, with Yaakov dreaming about the angels going up and down. An angel appears to him in a dream and shows him how the sheep are mating. At the end of last week's Parsha, a camp of angels meets him. We're going to read that soon. And in the beginning of this week's Parsha, of course, he sends angels to his brother Esav. But it doesn't stop there, because later on in the Parsha, he wrestles with the angel of Esav. And then we have another mention of angels in the Torah portion of Vayishlach, when Yosef is seeking his brothers and he can't find them. An angel directs him to them. We also have an angel conversing with Moshe in the beginning of the book of Shemos. That's in the burning bush. We have the angel of death, who is avenging on the night of the death of the firstborn, and the Jewish people have to stay inside, so they shouldn't be damaged by him. We have angels in the splitting of the sea, an angel protecting the Jewish people from the Egyptians. And Hashem tells Moshe in the Torah portion of Mishpatim how an angel is going to enter the land of Israel with them and guard them and make them succeed in their conquest of the land. Last but not least, in the Torah portion of Balak, we have an angel that appears to Bilam's donkey. Bilam doesn't see it at first, and eventually Bilam does see it, and the angel instructs Bilam not to say anything different than what God wants him to say. So we have a lot of angel talk in the 5 books of Moshe. So we're going to talk a little bit about them today. Any questions before I continue? Any questions?
Only that in a lot of places, in Chumash, angel when you're talking about.
I'm barely hearing you. I'm barely hearing you again.
Places in Chumash, it says actually Malachim, like even now, Vayishlach Malachim.
Yes.
Yeah. But in some of the places you mentioned, it just says Ish.
Yes, 100%.
Okay, we learned that it's a Malach, but it says Ish. Okay.
Yes, 100%. And in some of the cases, it's not even so clear. How do I let somebody in that's in the waiting room? I saw them flick up on the screen.
Let them in. Just click to let them in.
No, but that little notification disappeared. I don't know where it went.
They went someplace else.
Oh, is that what happened? Okay.
They're not in the waiting room anymore.
I don't see the waiting room, so I guess they're not, yeah. Okay, so yes, in some of those places it's not clear. And the truth is that when it says malach, it actually doesn't always mean an angel, because a malach can mean a messenger. We see that in the Torah portion of Chukas, where the Jewish people send a message to the country of Edom, asking for safe passage and permission to go through their land to the land of Canaan. And when they tell them a brief history of their of what's been going on with them for the past few hundred years, they talk about going down to Egypt and being made slaves, and then they say Vayishlach malach vayotzienu mimitzrayim, and God sent an angel, literally, if we translate it literally, and he took us out of Egypt. So obviously Moshe Rabbeinu was not an angel. He was born to a mother and he passed away and everything. So sometimes malachim or malach can be translated as a messenger. And going back to what you were saying about Ish, that is correct. Sometimes they're called Ish, sometimes they're called malach, and sometimes they're called malach Elohim. So when it's malach Elohim, it's clear that it's an angel of God. When it's malach, could be an angel, could be a messenger. When it's Ish, it's usually a man, but sometimes it's an angel. And I'll give you an example of where it says Ish, but it clearly means an angel. And that is in the beginning of the Torah portion of Vayera, where God appears to Abraham after his bris milah. And then he sees three anoshim passing by, three men passing by, and he runs after them and he offers them to eat, and they come and they eat, and they predict he's going to have a son. Okay, that could be an angel, angels, that could be people. But then it says he shows them on their way, and then it says the two malachim came to Sodom that evening. And there definitely means angels, not messengers, because they literally destroy the city. They turn the city over. So that's not a human capability. So in that context, even though they're called Anashim in the beginning of the story, we see towards the end of the story that they are clearly angels. And the reason they're called Anashim is because they appeared as men. So it wasn't clear that they were angels until later. So, yeah, the same is true, by the way, of the battle that Yaakov has, the wrestling match that he has in this week's Parsha. It actually doesn't say clearly that it was an angel. It just says an ish, a man. So that could also be interpreted two ways. I mean, most of the commentaries say it was an angel, but there's no clear supernatural event in that case. Okay. With no further ado, let us read some of the verses. So the first two of these three verses that I have here in the handout, and they're also on my screen if you're looking at the shared screen. So they're actually the end of last week's Parsha, and the third verse is the beginning of this week's Parsha. So it says, V'Yakov halach ledarko, v'yifgeu voy malache Elokim. Yaakov went on his way, and he was greeted by angels of God. Vayirma Yaakov ka'asher ra'am, and when Yaakov saw them, he said, Machane Elokim zeh, this is a camp of God. Vayikar Shem HaMokem Hu Machanaim, he called the name of that place Machanaim, two camps. Now Rashi says that these were the angels of Israel that had come to greet him. There are different angels that, so to speak, assist people in the land of Israel, and different angels in the diaspora. The land of Israel is a special land, has a special kedusha, special holiness to it, and they're different angels. And we actually read in last week's Parsha that when Yaakov was on the way out of Israel, he slept and he saw angels going up and down a ladder. And Rashi says that those were the angels of Israel ascending because he was about to leave the land and they could not leave the land. So they ascended back to heaven. And then the angels of Chutz La'aretz, of the diaspora, came to kind of escort him from then on. So it's interesting that in last week's Parsha, when he was leaving, the angels of Israel ascended before he left. They couldn't even set foot out of the Holy Land. He was still in Beisel, and the mountain he was sleeping on was Mount Moriah, which is in Jerusalem. How that got to Beisel is another question. But in any case, he was definitely in the land of Israel. Yet, you know what? I think it's hidden by the bar. There it is. Wow. They were in the waiting room. It was hidden by the bar on my screen. Okay. Okay, welcome to those who just entered. Sorry about that. I saw you in the waiting room before, and then I couldn't find you. But welcome. Okay, so we are discussing the fact that when Yaakov was coming back to the land of Israel, at the end of last week's Parsha, the angels of Israel came out of Israel to greet him. He was still well in the diaspora. He wasn't on the border yet because he still had to cross the Yabok River, which we read about later in the Torah portion. So he was well in the land, in the diaspora. He was still in that area, Jordan. And yet the angels of the land of Israel came out to greet him. So, to understand that, the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains that when a person is traveling to Israel, it's different than when he's leaving Israel. When you leave Israel, the angels don't take even one step outside of Israel to be with you because they're angels of the Holy Land. They can't step out of the Holy Land. But when you're going to Israel, because your very trip is to go to the Holy Land, so it's not a problem for the angels to come out to greet you because that is part of their job, to assist people in their aliyah, so to speak, in their ascension and their going up to the Holy Land. That is considered part of their, part of their job description, if you will.
Tasks.
So, then we start with this week's Parsha. Any questions before I continue? No? Everybody's good? Okay. I guess everything is clear. The verse continues, Vayishlach Yaakov malachem lefanav el Esav achiv. Yaakov sent angels in front of him to Esav his brother. How do I mute everybody?
Andrea, we can hear you.
Audio settings. How do I mute everybody? Every week ask the same question. Participate.
I'm sorry, I'm going to mute right now.
Okay, there we are. Everybody's muted. You can unmute yourself as needed. Okay, so Vayishlach Yaakov malachim lefanav el Esav achiv. Yaakov sent malachim in front of him to Esav his brother. Arza Seir Sedei Edom, to the land of Seir, the field of Edom. And of course, the purpose of his sending these malachim was to find out how Esav was feeling towards him. If he was still in a vengeful mood and he wanted to kill him for the revenge, to revenge his, so to speak, stealing the brachas, the blessings of Yitzchok, or if he had calmed down. Now, the Medrash, by the way, is not so happy with Yaakov sending these angels, because the Medrash says that Esav was like a sleeping dog, and you're supposed to let sleeping dogs lie. You're not supposed to try to see how they're feeling, if they need some therapy, or if they'd like to be pet, or anything like that. You just let them lie and don't disturb them. The Medrash quotes this verse, Machzik ba'ozne kelev oiver misaber al riv loy loy. Like one who seizes a dog's ear, so is a passerby who meddles in a dispute that is not his. So you pass a dog and you give it a flick on the ear, you're asking for trouble. The same thing if there's two people having a fight, I'm not talking about a physical fight, and you're separating the parties to protect them. I'm talking about, a dispute, and you get involved and you take sides, so you're asking for trouble. So the Medrash compares this to a person who is passing by on a crossroads, and there's a gangster who's just sleeping on the side of the road. And the guy who's passing by wakes up the gangster and says, "Hey, I heard there was a gangster around here. Did you see him by any chance?" Well, that story doesn't end very well for the protagonist. So if there's a gangster around, make sure you don't wake him up. And according to the Medrash, if Yaakov had just kind of tiptoed into the land and just made his way back to Yitzchok and just kind of snuck in the back door, he might have been fine. And we could have skipped all of this Torah portion with the whole thing and the presents and the prayers and the angels and everything. But Yaakov decided to have it spelled out for him, and he wanted to know for sure, so he sent these malachim. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the word malachim can be translated either as messengers or as angels. And in the translation that I put into the document that you can see, which is from Sefaria, they use a translation of the JPS, the Jewish Publication Society, and there they translate it as messengers. Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother Esav in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Well, there is one opinion, which Rashi brings, that in fact these malachim were just messengers. They were human beings, and he sent them as messengers to see how his brother was feeling and thinking about it. Like we mentioned, there is a verse where the word malach definitely means a human being. It's used in the context of Moshe Rabbeinu. So,
Rebbe, he had to send people anyway with all those animals. So it's not like you can't say that it means people. Obviously, he sent a lot of people with all those gifts.
right. The gifts were sent with people, that's correct. So at some point he did send people. Yes, indeed. So the other opinion in the Medrash is no, that Yaakov actually did send malachim, did send angels. And they try to support their interpretation of the verse based on the previous two verses, where it discusses Malache Elokim. Clearly, these are angels, because they're called Malache Elokim, angels of God.
Rabbi,
Yes.
No one in the Torah, as I can remember, has the ability to send messengers. Is that right?
To send messengers,
Wait,
to send angels. What do you mean by that?
I mean, no one has the ability to send angels out toward somebody else or use angels in the way Yaakov used it.
So that's a good question. And I will say that that is a support for the view that says that malachim here means messengers and not angels. Because generally in the Chumash, we don't find angels being given jobs by men. Usually the angels are instructed by Hashem as to what their mission should be. And the angels come down here and fulfill that mission and perhaps tell us what to do. Take, for example, with Hagar. The angel told her, go back to Sarah. You're going to have a baby. With Abraham, the angel said, don't slaughter your son. You're going to have a baby. And then they went to Sodom. They told Lot to leave. They destroyed the city. And then again, in the Torah portion of Vayetze, first they were protecting Yaakov, then they were showing him about the sheep. And we don't have, to the best of my knowledge, in the 5 books of Moshe, we don't ever have another case of a human being telling an angel what to do. We just don't have it. But now that I'm thinking of it, there is a similar case in the book of Judges. In the book of Judges, where we read about the birth of Shimshon. Now, Shimshon's mother first has a vision of an angel, and the angel tells her that even though she was barren until that point, she was going to have a baby, and that the baby's going to be a Nazir from when he's born. Can't eat, can't drink wine, can't cut his hair. And basically, Elkanah, who was the father of Shimshon, asks for the angel to come back and communicate with them again. He wants more information about this baby and how they have to behave. And the angel does come again. So it's not quite the same as over here where Yaakov is sending them, but we do find that there is an interaction, there is a back and forth. It's not just an instruction from the angel, but the angel gets a request and fulfills the request. Actually, now that you say it, I'm thinking about also the story with Sodom. At first, the angels were supposed to destroy all 5 cities. And Lot asks for them to spare the smallest city so that they can run away to there. And the angel agrees. So again, it's still not the same as here, where the angel is kind of sent by Yaakov, almost like commanded, to do this. There, it's more of a request. But yes, it is interesting. So apparently, Yaakov was a high-level tzaddik, and he had the ability to instruct angels as to what to do. That's a good point. Okay. So coming back to the Medrash, that says, according to one opinion, that these were actual angels, and they supported, like I was saying, based on the end of last week's Torah portion, where Yaakov has a whole camp of angels coming to greet him. So based on the continuity of the verses, they say, well, it must have been these same angels that had come to greet him, that Yaakov took some of them and sent them on this mission. In fact, some of the commentaries use the last word of the last week's Torah portion as a remez, as a hint to this concept. So nowadays, everybody's into acronyms, like LOL is laugh out loud, and ETA is estimated time of arrival or departure, whatever you have. So this is like the new thing with text messages and social media, all these acronyms. So we have that in our tradition. It's called Roshei Tevos. It's an acronym. If you look at the end of the second verse in the handout, it says Machanayim. And the acronym is, I'm trying to remember it, but it's basically Me'oisam Chayolim Notal Yaakov. I'm missing something here. Let me look at my notes that I took for myself. Hold on. Notal Yaakov Malachim, that's it. Okay. Machanayim stands for Me'oisam Chayolim, from those troops. Notal Yaakov Malachim. Yaakov took angels. He took angels from those groups of angels that came to greet him, and he sent them towards Esav. So this is how they support their view. Okay, but on the other hand, like I said, some say that it's referring to human beings, messengers, and they support it based on the fact that it doesn't say Vayishlach Yaakov Malachi Elohim, angels of God. It leaves out that word. So it makes it sound like it's not angels of God, it's just ordinary malachim, whatever that means. And it also doesn't say that Yaakov sent those angels or some of those angels or them. It could have just said them like a pronoun. So instead it says malachim, so it could indicate that it actually means something else. Not those, but something else, which perhaps are even human beings. Okay, after that whole introduction, we come to the Rashi. Rashi, of course, is the foremost commentator on the Torah, and he bases himself on Chazal, on the teachings of our sages. Chazal, by the way, is a Roshei Tevis, it's an acronym for Chachamenu Zechroinam Levracha, our sages of blessed memory. So he draws heavily on the Midrashim and on the Gemara in order to interpret the verses. Nevertheless, at the same time, he tries to give us an interpretation that goes with the simple, plain meaning of the text. He does not, prefer to give interpretations that do not fit in with the plain meaning. So this is his style. Now, there are some commentaries who give interpretations that are not with the plain meaning, and there are some commentaries that even give interpretations that are more of the plain meaning. Take, for example, Rashi's grandson, the Rashbam. So his interpretations are much more simple interpretations and less midrashic and esoteric. But nevertheless, the general style of Rashi is to give us the straightforward interpretation. And here we have the Rashi. I'm going to read it inside. It's a very short Rashi. The Rashi has a Divrei HaMaschil, which is when he quotes the words of the verse, and then he has the interpretation of the verse. So the quote is, Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim. And the Rashi explains that and says, Malachim Mamish, actual angels. And this is based on Genesis Rabbah, that's the Medrash that I mentioned earlier. So Rashi chooses to give an interpretation that seems miraculous. It is miraculous. It doesn't seem miraculous. It is miraculous that Yaakov could send angels. The whole idea of an angel is miraculous. I mean, we know they exist, but to actually see them and interact with them is miraculous. And in this particular place, as someone mentioned earlier, the fact that he actually instructed them what to do and they listened to him, that's even more unusual. So why does Rashi choose an interpretation that does not seem to be a straightforward one, rather one that seems a little bit, I don't want to say fantastic because I don't want to make it sound like it's impossible, not impossible at all, but, a little bit more unusual, out of the ordinary, supernatural. Why go for the supernatural interpretation if you could stick with a acceptable natural interpretation? Of course, there are miracles in the Torah. We don't shirk away from saying that there were miracles. The sea actually split. It wasn't just a low tide. And, the firstborn actually were smitten to death by Hashem. It wasn't some kind of, bacterial infection that just affected the firstborn. We have no problem with miracles. But why does Rashi prefer the supernatural interpretation over the natural one? So I'll open it up if anybody has any comments or questions or answers. Feel free.
I we're all.
I can't hear you. Sorry.
So I'm forever grateful. Ezra. I think just the reaction of Esav when he comes to meet his brother. The fact that that his reaction is subdued would indicate that the people or the entities that he met may have had an effect on him to the extent that he saw that these people that were being sent by his brother were actual angels, and so he had to watch his step.
I hear it. Yaakov Asa was apparently softened up by events that happened earlier. That does seem to be true, because he reacted very differently than what Yaakov expected. So you're suggesting that it was the angelic experience that softened him up. Of course, he also got actual gifts and expensive gifts, so that also was a help. Yaakov was also humbling himself and bowing to him, and that probably also helped him get over it, at least temporarily. But the angels, if they were angels, definitely would have impressed him. Yes, I hear that. Anybody else? Okay, so here we go. The Lubavitcher Rebbe explains the reason why Rashi prefers to say that they were actual angels rather than messengers is based on a halacha in Shulchan Aruch. In the Code of Jewish Law, there is a law as follows. If a person sends somebody on a mission, and it's a dangerous mission, and that person dies, the person who was sent on the mission, then the person who did the sending must do tshuva, must repent, because they are considered somewhat responsible for that person's death. Now, the reason I'm saying somewhat responsible is that he didn't actually kill him, obviously, didn't intend to kill him by any means, of course, but nevertheless, he was a cause and a contributing factor to the person's death. He sent them on a mission that he should not have sent him on. He should have realized that it was dangerous. A person has to act with forethought. You have to think carefully what's going to happen. What could happen if I do this? What could happen if I do that? What are all the factors that are involved? You have to consider it. Take, for example, the story with King David and the city of Nov. I'm going to tell you the story in brief in case you don't know it yet. King David was running away from his father-in-law, King Saul, who wanted to kill him because King Saul thought he was trying to usurp the throne. King David had no food, and he was going to starve to death. He literally had nothing to eat. So he stopped off in the city of Nov, which was where the Mishkan was located at that time, the temporary sanctuary. And he presented himself to the Kohanim that were there. And he said to them, listen, I'm on a mission from my father-in-law, and I had to leave in a great hurry. And I didn't get a chance to bring any food with me, nor did I get a chance to bring my sword. So can you please supply me with some food and a sword? Of course, he didn't tell them that he was a fugitive and he was on his father-in-law's most wanted list, because then they would not have assisted him, because they would not have wanted to be seen as traitors to the king. So, of course, he didn't say that because he needed their help. So they believed him, and they gave him food. They actually had no food in the entire city, except for truma, which is holy bread only for a Kohen, as well as lechem hapanim, which is the showbread, also only for a Kohen. And they weren't sure which one they should give him. The chief shepherd of King Saul, what happened to be in Nov at that time, his name was Doeg HaAdomi. And they asked Doeg a halachic shaila. He was a great Torah scholar. And they said, listen, King David is here and he needs some food. He's on a mission to the king. We know he's not a Kohen, but we can either give him the truma, which is holy, or the lechem hapanim, which is holy. What do you think? And Doeg said the lechem hapanim is better, the showbread, and that's what they gave him. They also gave him the sword of Goliath. He had smitten Goliath with Goliath's own sword after he felled him with his rocks, as everybody knows from the story of David and Goliath. And after he killed Goliath, the sword of Goliath was placed in the Mishkan as kind of a thank you to Hashem for that great salvation. So they gave him the sword of Goliath, which he had himself earned, so to speak. And he went on his way. He succeeded in escaping from King Saul. And King Saul, of course, chased after him and was always one step behind him, but he always managed to keep one step ahead. He was always around the corner. He was hiding. He was in a cave. He was here. He was there. King Saul had to leave at the last minute. All kinds of miracles that he survived. So finally, King Saul got mad and he said to his people, I know there must be people who are aiding and assisting David to escape from me. Why aren't you telling on them? Why are you keeping it a secret from me? You guys are on his side. You're helping him. If you don't help me, you're against me. So his chief shepherd spoke up, Doeg HaAdomi, who knew about the city of Nov and what they had done. And he said, well, since you're asking, the city of Nov, the Kohanim, they helped King David, or he wasn't the king yet. They helped David. They gave him bread. They gave him a sword, and he told them the whole story. He told him the whole story. Now, of course, Doeg knew that they did it in innocence, but he was just trying to make himself look good and make them the scapegoat. And when King Saul called them to task and asked them why they had assisted David, they said, well, he told us that he was on a mission from you, and we believed him, and he's your son-in-law, and he's your general, and that's why we helped him. King Saul refused to believe them, and he sentenced them all to death. None of his men dared to lift up their swords and kill the Kohanim of Hashem, except for this very Doeg. This very man who was a Torah scholar, unfortunately a treacherous one, he was the only one who agreed to carry out the death sentence, and he himself, with his own hands, killed out the entire city of Kohanim. So that was a very tragic story. And of course, King Saul was punished severely for that sin. He himself was killed in battle together with his sons. But many years later, King David was also judged, and he also was nearly killed in a battle, and that was considered a punishment for his part in that tragedy. What was his part? Very simple. He should have realized that by putting them in a position of them assisting him, that he was endangering them. So he was considered to be responsible for their deaths. And he was judged quite harshly for that. He nearly died. And even though in the end he didn't, but there was still more suffering in his family to come from that judgment. And this is the basis for saying that if a person sends a messenger on a mission and that person gets killed, the person who sent him must do tshuva because he should have thought the matter through, should have considered it carefully. I'll give you an example of a person who thought things through, and this is just a little segue. I don't know if I told the story yet. Rabbi Aryeh Levin, the tzaddik of Yerushalayim. Did I ever tell you about him? Anybody? No?
No.
Okay, Rabbi Aryeh Levin was called the tzaddik of Yerushalayim. He was a very kind man. He was also a Torah scholar. He taught in the yeshiva Eitz Chaim, and he took it upon himself to visit prisoners and lepers, by the way. He would visit the leper colony, and he would visit the prisons, and he would take care of the people that nobody wanted to take care of. And he became quite a celebrity because he was doing that during the war years and leading up to the War of Independence, when there were many Zionists who were taken into captivity by the British. And he was there also to give comfort to those that were sentenced to death. And some of them were hung by the British, unfortunately. And he was there with them at their last moments. And with many other early leaders of the Zionist movement, who were captured and so on, Lehi and the Irgun and so on. So, of course, after the state was established, he became a celebrity. He remained humble and he still continued to visit the prisons, but he was very highly respected by many of the important members of the Zionist movement and many in the government and so on. Anyway, he passed away in the 1980s. He was in his 80s. And he passed away early Friday morning. And they wanted to plan the funeral. They knew that a lot of people would want to come to the funeral from all over Israel. And if they did the funeral later on Friday, they would be causing people to drive on Shabbos, because a lot of his admirers were not Shabbos observant people, and they didn't want to do that. But the problem was that the ground, the soil in Har HaMenuchos, where he was going to be buried, in the cemetery in Givat Shaul, it's very hard earth, packed earth, and it takes a long time to dig. So they were standing around the grave, the family and the Chaver Kadisha and the grave diggers, and they were discussing what time to schedule the funeral. And they were saying, we really shouldn't schedule it late because it's going to cause people to drive, but how can we schedule it early if it's going to take so long to dig up the grave? Anyway, one of the grave diggers piped up and he said, it's no problem. You can dig it up very quickly. It's not hard earth. It's actually soft earth. So they said, what are you talking about? So he said, well, Rabbi Levin used to visit his wife every year on her yard site. And one year he said to me, what if I pass away on a Friday? And what if there's not enough time to dig up my grave and have my funeral early enough on Friday for people to get back on Shabbos without driving? So he said to me, you know what? I'm going to pay you to dig up my grave and put it back in. And that way the earth will be soft. And if it happens that I pass away on Friday, they'll be able to dig it up quickly. And that's exactly what they did. They dug it up on Friday, quickly, Friday morning, and they had the funeral early, and everybody was able to drive back before Shabbos. Was Rabbi Levin a prophet? I don't think so. I mean, he was a holy man. He did a lot of good things, but I don't know if this was prophecy. He was a man who thought things through, who analyzed things, and he thought of every possibility. And he realized that this is one of the possibilities. There are 7 days of the week. A person can pass away on Friday, just like he can pass away on any other day. And he thought it all through. And that's why he did what he did. So this was the issue here. Yaakov wanted to send messengers to Esav, but Esav was a known murderer. From a young age, he was killing people. The day of his grandfather's funeral, according to our tradition, the day that Yaakov gave him the soup and so on, that very day he had killed Nimrod. And he was busy raping women, married women, Rashi says, all kinds of things he was doing. Plus, he had himself said, Yikrevu Yemei Evel Avi va'aharga es Yaakov achi. When my father dies, I'm going to kill Yaakov. So he wasn't even hiding it. So how could Yaakov, in good conscience, send messengers, human messengers, to Esav and put their lives at risk? And this is why Rashi says, Malachim Mamish. These must have been actual angels, not messengers, not human messengers. Yaakov would not have done that. These must have been angels, and Yaakov had no problem sending them because you can't kill an angel. Yes.
Rabbi, I just wanted to ask you a question.
Please.
Is it true that if you send someone on a mission, a good mission, no evil will befall them? Is there such a thought?
Yes, there is a thought. It's called Shluchei Mitzvah Einon Nizokin. A person who is sent on a mitzvah mission will not get damaged. Mitzvah will protect the person.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, that's not a guarantee if you're going to a dangerous place.
I see.
So you cannot say, well, I'm going to go to Ukraine, but I'm going to go on a mitzvah mission. I'm going to go to help people, and no rockets are going to fall on me.
You can go.
I wouldn't advise that.
You can go. You can't send anybody.
I don't know if you can go. If you have a wife, you have kids,
You have no shliach, but there's no shliach then.
I understand, but you're responsible for your own life. You have to be careful with your own life too.
Huh?
Yes. Ben.
Rabbi, that's
Yes.
why I understand that people, when somebody goes somewhere, they give them a few dollars and say, go and put it in a tzedakah box.
Exactly.
And
That's
they have a
something the
good
Lubavitcher
trip.
Rebbe would do all the time. He would give people dollars and tell them to give it to tzedakah at their destination. Not only
Right.
that, but if there were many destinations along the way, he would usually give them for all those destinations.
Right.
Not only that, but because he had multiple currencies, he would often give it in the currencies of those countries. So if you were going to Australia via England and Israel, he would give you pounds to give to tzedakah in England, and shekalim or liras to give to Israel, to tzedakah in Israel, and then Australian money to give in Australia. I'm not talking about at the dollars which the Rebbe gave to thousands of people. At that point, it was a big crowd. I'm talking about when the Rebbe had a private audience with people in his room, so he would sometimes do that.
Right.
So it's interesting that Yaakov did send somebody on a mission, and that person was nearly killed. Coming up in next week's Parsha. What's that about?
Joseph.
Exactly. He sent Yosef on a mission to go check out how his brothers were doing, and he was nearly killed. Shimon and Levi wanted to kill him. Reuven said, just throw him into the pit. There were snakes and scorpions in the pit. He survived. Yehuda said, take him out, send him, sell him. And of course, he ended up going down to Egypt, becoming the prime minister, and the rest is history. And Yaakov is the one who sent him on this mission. So it's unusual that here he was so careful not to, cause damage to anybody. And when it came to his own son, there was not that level of care. But on the other hand, we have to realize that Yaakov was not aware how much the brothers hated Yosef. He knew there was definitely some enmity between them, but he didn't realize it was to that level. Obviously, he knew there were some issues because they asked him, the dreams, and they interpreted it their way, and Yaakov kind of said, I don't know, we'll see, whatever. He wasn't so sure about it. So he knew there were issues, but he didn't realize that the enmity was so deep that they were willing to kill their own brother. So that's the only reason he sent him.
But he also told Joseph that his dreams are not that, nice to talk about.
Yes, exactly. Not everything that's true has to be said.
Yeah.
One has to be careful. We're missing somebody. What's the name of the fellow who always asks for a roundup at the end? Is it Mordechai?
Mordechai's on the phone.
Mordechai's on the phone. Oh, where are you?
David.
Which phone? I don't see a phone.
I see Mordechai on the phone.
I don't see him, but if you say so.
Top of the screen. I mean, on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
He's next to Naomi.
Okay, very good. So the roundup of the shir is that Yaakov was careful to not cause harm to anybody. He thought very carefully about his actions, and he therefore made sure to send angels and not human beings. So every person, whatever they're doing, whether it's with themselves or with others, involving other people, you have to think carefully what you may cause that person to do, to see, to experience. Even if it's not death, God forbid, it shouldn't be anything like death. But you don't want to send somebody to a place where they could get even damaged, whether it's physically damaged, spiritually damaged. There was a young man who once asked me about going to put tefillin on people, but the place that he was going to was a mall, and he was a yeshiva bacher, and there were women not dressed properly there, and he felt that he felt uncomfortable going there. So I told him that if he feels that it's too difficult for him to go to such a place and guard his eyes, that he should find a different spot to do his tefillin. So you have to be careful with missions. make sure that you send, whoever you send is not going to be put in a dangerous situation physically or spiritually. So I am going to wish you a good Shabbos, and I'm
Thank
also
you.
going to wish you a good next week, because the beginning of the week I have meetings on Tuesday,